Have you ever seen an injustice ignite a firestorm at 35,000 feet? A flight attendant throws out a black teen's life-saving medicine, unaware her father will ground the entire flight. What's a girl like that doing in first class? Smuggling something? That's what the flight attendant muttered before snatching the medicine bag from a quiet black teenager. 16-year-old Maya Vance was headed to Stanford for the opportunity of a lifetime. Instead, mid-flight at 35,000 feet, her life-saving medication was tossed away like trash by someone who saw her skin before her medical file. But the attendant didn't know who Maya's father was, or that her reckless act would ground the entire flight, spark national outrage, and ignite a storm of justice no airline could outrun. What started with racism ended with a reckoning. The hum of the Boeing 777 was a lullaby of progress, a silver promise cutting through the vast blue emptiness above the American Midwest. For Dr. Julian Vance, the sound was a welcome distraction from the frantic rhythm of his own heart. He glanced at his daughter Maya in the window seat beside him. Her head rested against the cool acrylic of the triple-paned window, her eyes tracing the patchwork of green and gold farmland 35,000 feet below. A faint, serene smile played on her lips. To any other passenger, she was just a teenager, pretty with intricate braids framing a heart-shaped face lost in the wonder of flight. But Julian saw the subtle, almost imperceptible tremor in her hands, the slight pallor beneath her warm brown skin. He saw the warrior who had battled her own body to a fragile truce. The trip was a pilgrimage of hope. Maya, a brilliant student with a passion for astrophysics, had been offered a provisional scholarship to Stanford University. It was the culmination of years of relentless study, of tutors in hospital rooms, of exams taken through a haze of pain and medication. The condition, juvenile dermatomyositis, was a cruel thief, a rare autoimmune disease that caused chronic muscle inflammation and weakness. For a while, it had stolen her ability to walk, to write, even to swallow. But a new biologic therapy, a cutting-edge treatment that Julian himself, as a pediatric immunologist, had peripherally consulted on during its research phase, had given her back a life. It had given her back this dream. What shocking twist will turn this nightmare into a fight for justice? The medicine was their holy grail. It wasn't a simple bottle of pills. It was a series of pre-filled syringes containing a custom-compounded protein solution that had to be kept at a stable, cool temperature. Lose the solution, let it get warm, and its delicate protein chains would denature, rendering it useless. Replacing it wasn't a matter of calling a pharmacy. It required a specialized lab, days of preparation, and a cost that could rival a used car. That's why the small gray insulated pouch tucked carefully inside Maya's carry-on was more valuable than anything else they owned. Inside, nestled between two gel packs, were the 4 syringes she would need for the 2-week trip. Julian had triple-checked the pouch that morning. He had the doctor's letter, the prescription details, and a TSA notification card, all in a neat plastic sleeve. He was a man who left nothing to chance, especially not his daughter's health. "You okay, sweetie?" he murmured, his voice low enough not to disturb his wife, Anais, who was dozing in the aisle seat. Maya turned from the window, her dark eyes bright. "More than okay, Dad. I can't believe this is real. What if I get to meet Dr. Evans? His paper on gravitational lensing is what I based my entire honors thesis on." Julian's heart swelled. This was the Maya he fought for. Not the patient, but the scholar. "You'll charm the pants off him," he said with a grin. "Just don't start correcting his math." She laughed, a sound that was music to his ears. It was in these moments of normalcy suspended between heaven and earth that he allowed himself to breathe. He allowed himself to believe that the worst was behind them. The spell was broken by the clatter of the beverage cart and a voice, sharp and clipped, that sliced through the cabin's gentle hum. "Carry-ons need to be completely under the seat in front of you, sir. All the way. Not halfway." Julian looked up. A flight attendant with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Claire was addressing the man across the aisle. Her smile was a thin, painted-on line that didn't reach her eyes, which were a cold, assessing blue. There was an edge to her, a weary impatience that seemed to simmer just below the surface of her professional veneer. She moved down the aisle with an air of proprietary authority, her gaze scanning, searching for infractions. Julian nudged Mia's bag a little further under the seat with his foot, though it was already well out of the way. He was a man who avoided conflict. He understood rules and protocols. But he also understood people, and his clinical eye caught the micro-expressions on Claire Thornton's face as she continued her patrol. He saw the quick, dismissive glance she gave a Hispanic family struggling to quiet a baby. The exaggeratedly slow way she explained the seatbelt to an elderly Asian man. It was subtle, but it was there. A hierarchy of patience, a sliding scale of courtesy, and for some reason, it put him on edge. An hour into the flight, Maya began to feel a familiar faint ache in her joints. It was the precursor, the body's early warning system. "Dad," she whispered, her brow furrowing slightly. "I think I need my afternoon dose a little early." The pressure change maybe. "No problem," Julian said instantly, keeping his voice calm and reassuring. "We'll do it right after the service is done." As the beverage cart passed their row, Julian caught Claire's eye. "Excuse me, miss?" She stopped, her expression one of strained tolerance. "Yes, my daughter needs to take some medication. Would it be possible to get a cup of water, please?" Claire's eyes flickered from Julian to Maya, then to the carry-on bag at Maya's feet. "All passengers will be served in turn." "I understand that," Julian said, his tone still polite. "It's just a bit time-sensitive. We'd be very grateful." A flicker of something, annoyance, suspicion crossed Claire's face. She sighed, a theatrical exhalation of burden, and poured a plastic cup of water from a large bottle, sloshing some onto the tray as she handed it over. "There." "Thank you," Julian said, ignoring the rudeness. He helped Maya pull her carry-on onto her lap. She unzipped the front pocket and retrieved the gray insulated pouch. It was discreet, no larger than a paperback book. As Maya's fingers, still with that slight tremor, worked at the zipper of the pouch, Claire, who had only moved one row down, turned back, her eyes narrowed, zeroing in on the bag. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the conversations of nearby passengers. Maya flinched, startled by the sudden interrogation. It's my medicine pouch." Claire took a step back into their row, her body blocking the aisle. "Let me see it." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Julian felt a switch flip inside him. The calm, conflict-averse man receded, replaced by the fierce protector. "That won't be necessary," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's temperature-controlled medication for my daughter. I have all the required documentation right here if you'd like to see it." He gestured to the plastic sleeve in the seatback pocket. Claire ignored him completely. Her focus was entirely on Maya, who now looked frightened, the pouch clutched in her hands like a lifeline. "Ma'am, I need to inspect that bag," Claire insisted, her voice rising in pitch and volume. "We have strict policies about liquids and unknown substances on board." "You should have declared this." "It was declared," Julian countered, his own voice hardening. "It was cleared by the TSA. It's a medical necessity. You are not authorized to inspect it." He knew the regulations. He had studied them. But Claire was operating on a different set of rules, ones written by her own biases. Her eyes ran over Maya. A young black girl with what to an untrained and suspicious eye could be seen as a secret pouch. In Claire's world, this equation added up to a threat. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, I will have to involve the captain." She snapped, her face flushing with anger. "I am responsible for the safety of this flight." Before Julian could respond, before he could present the paperwork that would dismantle her entire premise, Claire did the unthinkable. She reached down, her movement swift and aggressive, and snatched the gray pouch from Maya's trembling hands. "Hey," Maya cried out, a sound of pure shock and violation. "I'll be taking this," Claire said, her voice triumphant. She held the bag up as if it were contraband, a trophy from a drug bust. "We'll see what the captain has to say about this." She turned on her heel and marched toward the front of the plane, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Julian, Annalise, and Maya sat frozen for a second, the violation hanging in the air between them. The low hum of the engine suddenly sounded menacing, the fragile hope that had filled their little section of the cabin had been shattered, and in its place, a cold, terrifying dread began to pool. The battle for Maya's health, a fight they thought they were winning, had just been reignited at 35,000 feet by a woman with a little bit of power and a whole lot of prejudice. The world seemed to shrink to the space between rows 14 and 15. The ambient noise of the cabin, the coughs, the clicks of laptops, the murmur of conversation faded into a dull roar in Julian's ears. His entire consciousness was focused on the retreating back of the flight attendant, Claire Thornton, as she disappeared through the curtain into the galley, clutching his daughter's life in her hand. "Julian, what just happened?" Annalise's voice was a sharp whisper, her sleep-fogged mind trying to catch up to the aggression they had just witnessed. She reached over, her hand finding Mia's. Mia was trembling, her eyes wide and fixed on the galley curtain, shimmering with unshed tears. "She took it," Maya whispered, her voice cracking. "She just took it." Rage, cold and pure, surged through Julian. It was a feeling he rarely experienced. His life was one of control, of measured responses and careful calculations. But the sight of his daughter's fear, and the sheer baseless audacity of the flight attendant's actions bypassed all his internal governors. Yet he knew that losing his temper would only validate Claire's narrative. They would paint him as the angry black man, aggressive and non-compliant. He had to be smarter. He had to be colder. He unbuckled his seat belt. "Stay here," he said to Annalise and Maya, his voice a low, steady command that belied the storm inside him. "I'm going to get it back." As he stood up, a hand gently touched his arm. It was the man from across the aisle, the one Claire had admonished earlier. He was a middle-aged white man with kind eyes and a weary expression. "Be careful, man," he said softly. "She's on a power trip. I saw the whole thing. It was out of line." Julian gave him a curt, appreciative nod. "I know." He walked toward the front of the plane, his long strides purposeful. Each step was a battle against the urge to run, to shout, to tear the curtain aside. He could feel the eyes of other passengers on him. He was no longer Dr. Vance, devoted father and respected immunologist. He was a large black man walking with intent toward the cockpit, and he was acutely aware of how that could be perceived. He paused at the galley curtain, took a deep centering breath, and pushed it aside. The scene in the galley was worse than he could have imagined. Claire was standing with another older flight attendant, the lead, judging by her uniform. Claire was talking animatedly, gesticulating with the gray pouch. "Refused to show me, became aggressive. Look at this thing. It's suspicious. No labels. It could be anything. Some kind of drug. I bet they were trying to be clever doing it right after we passed with the cart." The lead flight attendant, a woman with tired eyes and the name Sarah on her tag, was listening with a concerned frown. But before she could respond, Claire turned to the galley's waste disposal unit. It was a small sealed chute for trash leading to an external compartment. With a flick of her wrist, she opened it. The next few seconds stretched into an eternity for Julian. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. He saw her intention, the self-satisfied glint in her eye. "No!" Julian's voice boomed in the confined space. He lunged forward, but it was too late. Claire, with a final, contemptuous look at the pouch, dropped it into the chute. There was a faint metallic clink as it fell away, then silence. The medicine was gone. The air left Julian's lungs. The rage he had so carefully contained evaporated, replaced by a hollow, sickening dread. It wasn't just a bag. It was 4 syringes of a custom biologic. It was $18,000 worth of irreplaceable life-sustaining treatment. It was Maya's mobility, her health, her dream of Stanford, all just ejected from the aircraft into the void. Claire turned, a smug look of finality on her face. "It's disposed of per FAA protocol for unidentified potentially hazardous substances." Julian stared at her. He felt a strange, unnerving calm settle over him. It was the calm of absolute certainty. The calm of a man who had just seen his enemy cross a line from which there was no return. "What have you done?" he said, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying the weight of 1,000 storms. The lead flight attendant, Sarah, now looked horrified. Her eyes darted from Julian's ashen face to Claire's defiant one. "Claire, you didn't just you threw it out." "I followed procedure," Claire insisted, though a flicker of uncertainty now touched her features. The sheer raw devastation on Julian's face was clearly not the reaction she had expected from a busted drug mule. "You followed nothing," Julian said, his voice gaining strength. "You followed your own ignorant, prejudiced assumptions. You have just in the last 10 seconds committed an act of such profound negligence that you cannot possibly comprehend its consequences." He pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands moving with practiced speed. He brought up the PDF of the doctor's letter, the prescription, the chemical breakdown of the biologic, the TSA notification card. He held the screen up to Sarah's face. "This," he said, his voice shaking with controlled fury, "is what you just threw away. That was my 16-year-old daughter's medication for juvenile dermatomyositis, a temperature-sensitive biologic. Without it, she will relapse. Within 48 hours, she will experience severe muscle inflammation, debilitating pain, and progressive weakness. Within a week, she could be back in a wheelchair. You didn't dispose of a substance. You disposed of her future." Sarah's face went pale as she scanned the document. She looked from the phone to Julian, then to Claire, her expression a mask of dawning horror. "Oh my God, Claire." Claire's smugness had vanished, replaced by a pasty, defensive fear. "He didn't show me that. He was aggressive. He refused to cooperate. I tried to show you." Julian roared, the last of his control finally snapping. "I told you I had documentation. You weren't interested in documentation. You were interested in exercising your pathetic, fleeting authority over a child. You saw a black family. You saw a mysterious bag and you wrote a whole story in your head. And you chose to act on that disgusting little story instead of your training." He took a step closer, his height and sheer presence dominating the small space. "I am Dr. Julian Vance. I am a pediatric immunologist at Johns Hopkins. I have consulted on the very clinical trials that developed that drug. I know the protocols for its transport better than you know the safety instructions on this aircraft. And you, in your infinite wisdom, have just actively endangered a child under my care." He turned his burning gaze back to Sarah. "I need to speak to the captain right now and I need you to retrieve that bag." Sarah wrung her hands, her professional composure completely gone. "We can't? I mean the disposal chute. It's external. It's gone. It's not like the trash on the plane. It's gone." The finality of it hit Julian again. A physical blow. Gone. He leaned a hand against the wall of the galley, the world tilting slightly on its axis. He could feel the vibrations of the engines through the frame of the plane, a cruel reminder that they were still hurtling forward, away from any possibility of retrieval, away from any source of help. He had never felt so powerless. But in that powerlessness, a new resolve began to form, hard and sharp as a diamond. They had taken his daughter's health and thrown it away with the trash. They thought this was over. He straightened up, his eyes locking with Claire Thornton's. The fear in her eyes was now palpable, but it gave him no satisfaction. All he felt was a grim, chilling purpose. "Okay," he said, the word hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken threat. "Okay, you can't get it back, but you're going to land this plane." Sarah shook her head. "Sir, we can't just divert the flight." "You're not listening," Julian said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "I'm not asking you to divert. I'm telling you what's going to happen next. You have created a medical emergency on this aircraft, and I am going to hold every single one of you accountable. Now get your captain." He turned and walked back through the curtain, leaving the two flight attendants in the wreckage of their actions. The passengers who had overheard the confrontation stared at him, their faces a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and alarm. He ignored them all. He sat down next to Maya, who was now crying silently, her face buried in Annalai's shoulder. He took her hand. It felt cold. "It's going to be okay, Maya," he lied. He had no idea if it would be okay. "Daddy's going to fix this. But as he looked out the window at the indifferent blue sky, he knew this was a different kind of fix. It wasn't about medicine anymore. It was about justice. The flight attendant had made her move. Now it was his turn, and he would not be gentle. The walk back to his seat was the longest of Julian's life. Every pair of eyes felt like an accusation, a question. He sat down, the worn fabric of the seat a poor cushion against the sharp edges of his reality. Annalise looked at him, her own eyes wide with a question he couldn't yet answer. "It's gone," Julian said, the words tasting like ash. She threw it out. "It's gone." Annalise's face crumpled. A sharp, wounded sound escaped her lips before she stifled it. Her own training as a school principal, the instinct to remain composed in a crisis taking over. But Julian could see the terror behind her eyes. They both knew exactly what this meant. The carefully constructed dam holding back Maya's illness had just been dynamited. Maya lifted her head, her face streaked with tears. She threw it away. "Why?" "Because she's a fool," Julian said, his voice laced with a bitterness that was foreign to him. He squeezed her hand, trying to pour a strength he didn't feel into her. "But this isn't on you, baby girl. This is on them, and we're not done." Minutes later, the lead flight attendant, Sarah, appeared at their row. Her face was pale, her professional smile gone, replaced by a tight, nervous mask. Beside her stood a man in a crisp white pilot shirt, his shoulders adorned with 4 gold stripes, Captain Michael Corian. He had the kind of square-jawed, impassive face that was meant to inspire confidence. But today it looked merely weary and annoyed. "Dr. Vance," the captain began, his voice a low baritone designed not to carry. "My lead attendant tells me there's been a misunderstanding." Julian felt a fresh surge of anger at the word. A misunderstanding, as if this were a dispute over a meal choice. "Captain," Julian said, keeping his voice level and precise. "There has been no misunderstanding. Your flight attendant, Claire Thornton, illegally confiscated my daughter's medically essential temperature-sensitive medication. She ignored my attempts to provide federal and medical documentation, and then she willfully destroyed it by disposing of it via an external waste chute. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a series of deliberate, negligent, and discriminatory actions that have placed my child in medical jeopardy." Captain Corian's eyes flickered with impatience. He was a man accustomed to being in charge, to his word being final. He was a pilot, not a mediator. His job was to get the aluminum tube from point A to point B on time. This was a complication. "I understand you're upset," Corian said, his tone condescendingly placating. "Claire has given me her report. She states you were non-compliant and the nature of the item was unclear. Our flight attendants are trained to prioritize the safety and security of the aircraft above all else." "The safety of the aircraft?" Julian shot back, disbelief coloring his words. "From what?" "A 16-year-old girl with an autoimmune disease. Her medication posed as much of a threat to this aircraft as my eyeglasses. Your flight attendant wasn't prioritizing safety. She was indulging a prejudice, and in doing so, she has created a far more tangible danger. We can't just take every passenger's word for what's in their bag," the captain countered, crossing his arms. He was digging in, siding with his crew. It was the classic corporate playbook, circle the wagons. "Which is why," Julian said, his patience fraying into sharp, angry strands. "I have the documentation," which he refused to look at. "Would you like to see it, Captain, or is protocol only important when it's convenient for you?" He thrust his phone, still displaying the medical letter, toward Corian. The captain gave it a cursory, dismissive glance, his eyes barely scanning the text. "Look, Doctor, I'm sorry for the situation, but the item is gone. There's nothing I can do about that now. We're 2 hours from landing in San Francisco. I'm sure you can get a prescription filled once we're on the ground." The ignorance of the statement was breathtaking. It was the final brick in the wall of indifference that the airline was building around them. Annalise, who had been silent until now, spoke up, her voice trembling with a quiet fury. "Captain, you don't seem to understand. This isn't like losing a bottle of Tylenol. This medicine is custom compounded in a specific lab in Baltimore. You can't get a prescription filled. It takes over a week to prepare and costs thousands of dollars per dose. There isn't a single pharmacy in San Francisco or the entire state of California that can just give this to us. Corian's impassive mask twitched. This was clearly more complex than he'd hoped, but his priority remained unchanged. "What would you have me do?" he asked, an edge of exasperation in his voice. "Turn the plane around. We're past the point of no return. We don't have the fuel to go back to New York." "I want you to find a solution," Julian demanded. "Divert to the nearest major city with a significant medical center, Chicago, Denver, anywhere. We need to land and get Maya to a hospital, to a specialist who can manage this until we can figure out a way to get her medication. We need to start making calls now." The captain shook his head, a look of finality on his face. "I'm not diverting this aircraft for a non-critical situation. A diversion requires a clear and present danger to a passenger's life. Based on what you're telling me, your daughter is stable now. We will continue to San Francisco as planned. Our ground crew can assist you there." It was a stonewall, a complete and utter refusal to acknowledge the emergency they had created. To him, Maya was not a person, but a problem. Her potential suffering hours from now was an abstract concept, less real than his flight schedule and the paperwork a diversion would cause. Julian stared at him, a cold realization dawning. They didn't care. The rules, the protocols, the veneer of customer service, it all melted away in the face of liability and inconvenience. They would protect their own, even when they were catastrophically wrong. He was just a passenger, an angry black passenger. They needed to manage until they could hand him off to the faceless ground crew. He looked at Maya. Her face was a pale stoic mask, but he could see the terror she was trying to hide. She had lived through the relapses before. She knew the fire that was coming for her muscles, the fatigue that would feel like drowning. And the crew of this flight was flying her directly into that fire, refusing to even slow down. It was in that moment that Julian Vance, the calm and rational doctor, made a decision. He had tried to play by their rules. He had been polite. He had been logical. He had presented evidence. And they had met him with dismissal, condescension, and a complete abdication of responsibility. Fine, he would stop playing their game. He would start playing his. He looked Captain Corian dead in the eye. The pleading father was gone. The angry passenger was gone. In his place was something else, something the captain was not prepared for. "Captain Corian," Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying an unnerving weight of authority that made the pilot instinctively straighten up. "Let me be perfectly clear, so there are no more misunderstandings. You have two options before you. Option 1, you contact your dispatcher. You declare a medical situation and you divert this plane to the nearest suitable airport. We will handle it from there." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Option 2, he continued, his gaze unwavering, is that I will be forced to use the regulations against you. Right now, as her physician and her legal guardian, I am declaring my daughter, a passenger on this aircraft, medically unfit for continued flight due to the actions of your crew. I am formally notifying you, the pilot in command, that you are knowingly transporting a passenger toward a predictable and preventable medical crisis, a crisis your airline is solely responsible for." He leaned forward slightly. "And if you continue on your current course, I will ensure that by the time we land, every single regulatory body from the FAA to the Department of Transportation knows that Captain Michael Corian and Ascendair made a conscious decision to endanger a child. And I will use every ounce of my resources, both legal and medical, to ensure this becomes the defining moment of your career and your airline's reputation." The captain's jaw tightened. This was no longer a simple complaint. This was a direct, articulate threat wrapped in the language of liability and regulation. Julian wasn't just an angry father anymore. He was a highly intelligent, formidable opponent who knew the rules as well as they did. Before Corian could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. A young woman in seat 16C, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange, held up her phone. "Just so you know, Captain," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I've been live streaming this conversation for the past 5 minutes, and about 80,000 people are watching it with me." The young woman's words dropped into the tense standoff like a lit match into a puddle of jet fuel. 80,000 people. Captain Corian's head snapped toward her, his eyes widening in disbelief. The woman, who looked to be in her early 20s with bright pink hair and a nose ring, simply stared back, her phone held steady. Her screen name visible on the stream was Justice Jessa. "You're recording?" Sarah, the lead flight attendant, stammered, looking horrified. "Live streaming?" Jessa corrected her calmly. "There's a difference. It's not a recording I can delete. It's out there right now." The comments are, well, you can probably imagine. Julian felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected. Leverage. The private battle in aisle 14 had just gone public in the most explosive way possible. The airline's carefully constructed wall of indifference was being broadcast in real time to a massive unseen audience. Captain Corian's face, which had been a mask of stoic annoyance, was now a canvas of barely suppressed panic. This had escalated beyond his control. This was a full-blown viral public relations disaster unfolding at 35,000 feet. "Turn that off," he commanded, pointing a finger at Jessa. "It is against federal regulations to record crew members without their consent." "Actually, it's not," Jessa replied, her voice unshaken. "FAA regulations prohibit interference with a flight crew's duties, but there's no specific federal law against recording on a plane as long as I'm not being disruptive, and I'm just sitting in my seat. Besides, multiple state laws, including California, where we're headed, are one-party consent states for recording conversations in public spaces where there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. I'd argue a confrontation in the middle of an airplane cabin qualifies." Julian almost smiled. The captain had just brought a knife to a gunfight, and the vlogger had just revealed she was armed with a law degree, or at least a very well-researched understanding of her rights. Corian was speechless. He looked from Jessa's phone to Julian's stony face, then back to his lead attendant. He was trapped. Every word he said was being judged by tens of thousands of people. Every second he delayed made him look more callous, more incompetent. Julian decided to press his advantage. He would not be distracted by the sideshow, however helpful. He recentered the issue on what mattered. "The live stream is irrelevant to the core issue." "Captain," Julian said, his voice cutting through the captain's paralysis. "You are the pilot in command. The decision rests with you. You have a passenger on board who is now without her life-sustaining medication because of your crew. You have been formally notified of this fact. Her condition will deteriorate. That is a medical certainty. Continuing to your scheduled destination is an act of willful negligence. That is a legal certainty. What is your decision?" He had laid the trap perfectly by formally declaring Maya unfit to fly. He had shifted the legal burden squarely onto the captain's shoulders. If Corin continued and Maya had a severe relapse upon landing, or worse, during the descent, the captain and the airline would be unequivocally liable. The NTSB and FAA investigations would be brutal. The fact that he was warned on camera and now on a live stream would be indefensible. His career would be over. Corian stared at Julian, the gold stripes on his shoulders seeming to weigh him down. He was no longer a commander. He was a man on a ledge with a long way to fall. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked toward the cockpit as if the answers were on his instrument panel. Finally, he turned to Sarah. "Get on the horn with dispatch," he said through gritted teeth, his voice a low, defeated growl. "Advise them we have a passenger medical situation requiring a priority landing. Find the nearest suitable airport. Tell them we're diverting to Denver." Relief, sharp and overwhelming, washed over Julian. It wasn't a victory. Not yet. But it was a retreat from the brink. Annalise let out a shaky breath beside him, her hand gripping his arm tightly. The captain gave Julian one last venomous look. "We will be met by ground security and paramedics at the gate. Doctor, there will be a full inquiry." I welcome it, Julian said quietly. I'd suggest you have your union representative on speed dial. As the captain and Sarah hurried back to the front of the plane, a new sound filled the cabin. The captain's voice over the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an unforeseen passenger medical issue, we will be diverting our flight and landing at Denver International Airport. We understand this is a significant disruption to your travel plans and we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. Our ground staff in Denver will have more information regarding rebooking. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. A wave of groans and frustrated murmurs rippled through the aircraft. Passengers pulled out their phones, annoyance on their faces as they began the process of rearranging their lives. But for the Vances, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. But the drama was not yet over. The diversion to Denver would take over an hour. And as the plane began its slow westward turn, a new problem, a consequence Julian had predicted, but the captain had ignored, began to surface. A different flight attendant, a young man who looked flustered and out of his depth, approached their row. Dr. Vance. Yes. The captain asked me to inform you there's an issue. Because of our delayed departure from JFK and now this diversion, by the time we land in Denver into plane, the flight crew will have timed out. Julian nodded slowly. He knew exactly what this meant. You'll have exceeded your maximum permitted duty hours under FAA regulations. Yes, sir. The young man confirmed, which means this flight won't be continuing to San Francisco today. They're going to have to find a new crew. The aircraft is effectively grounded in Denver for the night. The ripple of passenger frustration from the diversion was about to become a tidal wave of fury. Julian Vance, in his quest to save his daughter, had through the airline's own cascading failures, grounded the entire flight. The man across the aisle who had offered his support earlier just shook his head and let out a low whistle. Wow, he muttered. That flight attendant really picked the wrong guy to mess with. Jessa, the vlogger, was still streaming. She flipped her camera to show her own face. For those of you just joining, she said to her audience, you are watching the real-time consequences of corporate negligence and discrimination. A flight attendant named Claire threw away a black teen's cancer medication. When the airline refused to help, her father, a doctor, forced them to divert. And now because of the delays, the whole flight is cancelled. This isn't just a travel nightmare, people. This is what happens when one person's prejudice is backed up by an entire system. And it looks like for Ascend Air Flight 732, the karma is landing in Denver. Julian looked at Maya. She was watching him, a look of awe and fear mixing in her eyes. He had done it. He had moved the immovable object. But as the plane descended toward the lights of Denver, he knew this was only the end of the beginning. The battle in the air was over. The war on the ground was about to begin. And somewhere in the front of the plane, Claire Thornton was beginning to understand that the pouch of medicine she'd so casually tossed away was about to cost her everything. The moment the wheels of the Boeing 777 hit the tarmac at Denver International Airport, a palpable tension settled over the cabin. The frustrated groans of the rerouted passengers had morphed into a low, simmering anger. The flight for them was over, stranded in a city hundreds of miles from their destination. For the Vance family, the ordeal was just entering a new uncertain phase. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Julian looked at Maya. The adrenaline of the confrontation was wearing off, and he could see the telltale signs of her body's rebellion. The pallor was more pronounced, her eyelids heavy with a deep, bone-weary fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. The clock was ticking louder now. We're on the ground, baby girl, he said softly, stroking her hair. We're going to get you to a hospital and get this sorted out. The jet bridge connected with a solid thud. But before the seatbelt sign could be switched off, the captain's voice came over the PA again, this time cold and formal. For the family in row 14, please remain in your seats. Paramedics and airline officials will be boarding to speak with you. All other passengers, please plane in an orderly fashion. It was a deliberate act of isolation, painting them as the problem, the source of everyone else's misery. As the other passengers began to file out, a torrent of angry looks and muttered comments were directed their way. Thanks a lot, one man grumbled. I'm missing my brother's wedding. Should have just taken your damn pills at home, another woman hissed. Julian shielded Maya from the worst of it. His body, a physical barrier against the hostility. Annalai's hand was a vice on his, her knuckles white. But then something else happened. Jessa, the vlogger, paused as she passed their row. I'm staying, she said quietly. My stream is still live. The world needs to see how they treat you on the ground, too. The man from across the aisle also stopped. I gave my statement to the lead attendant, he said to Julian. Told her I saw the whole thing, that your family was calm and she was the aggressor. My name is Robert Pinsky. I'm a lawyer. Here's my card. If they give you any trouble, you call me. No charge. Julian took the card, speechless for a moment. Thank you, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. In the midst of the hostility, these small acts of solidarity were a lifeline. Once the last passenger had deplaned, a new set of figures boarded. 2 paramedics, their faces professional and neutral. 2 stern-looking Ascend Air corporate security officers, and a harried-looking airport manager, his tie already loosened. And behind them, her face, a mask of pale, defiant fury, was Claire Thornton. She had been ordered to stay, to face the music she had composed. The lead paramedic, a calm woman named Linda, knelt by Mia's seat. Hi there, she said gently. I hear you're not feeling well. Can you tell me what's going on? While Annalise and Maya spoke with the paramedics, Julian stood to confront the officials. The airport manager, a man named Henderson, stepped forward. Dr. Vance, Henderson began, his tone dripping with corporate formality. We have a very serious situation here. A flight diversion, a full grounding, over 200 displaced passengers. We have a report from the flight crew of a passenger disturbance and non-compliance. Julian's eyes went cold. A passenger disturbance? Let me be crystal clear. The only disturbance on this flight was caused by your employee, Miss Thornton. He pointed directly at Claire, who flinched. She racially profiled my daughter, made baseless accusations, and then willfully destroyed over $18,000 worth of life-sustaining medication. Against all protocol and common decency, the diversion and grounding are not the situation. They are the consequence of that initial action. Do not try to reframe this. Claire stepped forward, her voice shaking but laced with venom. He was threatening me. He was aggressive. He and his daughter, they had a suspicious package. A suspicious package? Julian interrupted, his voice booming in the quiet cabin. He held up Robert Pinsky's card. There was another passenger, a witness, a lawyer, who has already given a statement to your lead attendant that we were calm and you were the aggressor. There is a live stream video of the latter part of our conversation with the captain viewed by at last count over 100,000 people that corroborates my story. So I suggest, Miss Thornton, that you stop lying. At the mention of the live stream, Henderson and the security officers exchanged a panicked look. This was clearly news to them and it changed the entire calculus of the situation. They were no longer just managing a disgruntled passenger. They were performing on a global stage. Henderson's entire demeanor shifted. The aggressive formality melted away, replaced by a desperate attempt at damage control. Okay. Let's all just take a step back. Dr. Vance, our primary concern right now is your daughter's well-being. My daughter's well-being should have been your primary concern 3 hours ago, Julian retorted. Right now, my primary concern is getting her to the University of Colorado Hospital. Their rheumatology department is one of the best in the country. Your airline will be providing a private medical transport to get us there. You will also be booking us a suite at a hotel near the hospital for an indefinite period. And you will be covering every single cent of the medical bills we are about to incur because of your employees' actions. That is the bare minimum of what you will do, and it is non-negotiable. Henderson looked like he'd been slapped. He started to stammer about policy and procedure, but Julian cut him off. There is no policy for this, Julian said. You are in uncharted territory and believe me, you do not want me as your navigator. Make the arrangements. Defeated, Henderson nodded and furiously began typing on his phone. The paramedic, Linda, stood up. Dr. Vance, your daughter is stable, but her blood pressure is elevated and her heart rate is tachycardic. Given her condition and the missing medication, I agree she needs to be taken for immediate evaluation. As the paramedics prepared to help Maya into a transport chair, Julian turned his attention one last time to Claire Thornton. She stood there isolated, watching her career and her life unravel. The corporate security officers were now looking at her not as a crew member to be protected, but as a liability to be contained. She looked at Julian, her eyes pleading for a scrap of understanding. I have a son, she whispered so softly only he could hear. He had a problem with drugs. I saw the bag and I thought. Julian looked at her and for a fleeting moment he felt a sliver of something other than rage. He saw a person whose own past trauma had become a lens distorting the world into a landscape of threats. But that sliver of empathy was instantly incinerated by the image of Maya's frightened face. Your trauma is not my daughter's burden, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. You didn't see a threat. You saw a target. You saw what you wanted to see, what your prejudice allowed you to see. And you chose to act on it. You didn't ask questions. You didn't verify. You didn't de-escalate. You accused, you confiscated, and you destroyed. Whatever happens to you now, Claire, you have earned it. Every last bit of it. He turned his back on her and walked over to Maya, who was now being gently wheeled toward the jet bridge. Annalise was beside her, holding her hand. At the end of the jet bridge, as they entered the terminal, they were met by a sight that stunned them. A small crowd had gathered. Jessa was there still streaming, but there were also airport employees, other passengers from their flight who had seen the stream and even a local news crew that had been alerted. And as Maya was wheeled through, they didn't see a problem or a disruption. They saw a young girl, a victim, and they began to applaud. It was a soft, sporadic clapping at first. Then it grew, an impromptu wave of support and empathy that washed over the Vance family. Julian felt tears well in his eyes. He had fought so hard, felt so alone against the monolithic power of the airline. But he wasn't alone. The system was powerful, but it wasn't impenetrable. The truth amplified by 100,000 voices could still break through. As they were escorted toward the exit, Julian glanced back at the window overlooking Gate B-52. He could see Claire Thornton being led away by the corporate security officers, her face ashen. Her reckoning had begun. But Julian knew the real karma wasn't just about her downfall. It was about building something new from the wreckage. The fight was far from over. 6 months later, the world was a different place for everyone involved in Ascend Air Flight 732. The crisp autumn of Denver had given way to the biting winds of a Baltimore winter. But for the Vance family, a new season of life had begun. The aftermath had been a whirlwind. The story, propelled by Jessa's viral stream and picked up by national news outlets, had become a case study in modern-day corporate accountability. Ascend Air, caught in a public relations nightmare of its own making, had capitulated on every front. They had flown in a new supply of Maya's medication on a private charter within 36 hours. They had covered every medical and accommodation expense. Their CEO had issued a public televised apology to the Vance family. Maya had thankfully stabilized under the care of the Denver doctors. The relapse had been held at bay by a thread. The trip to Stanford had been postponed, but the university, having seen the news, had not only held her scholarship, but had offered her a position in a prestigious summer research program, personally overseen by Dr. Evans himself. Her dream, once nearly extinguished, was now brighter than ever. She had become a reluctant but powerful symbol of grace under pressure. But Julian Vance was not content with apologies and financial settlements. He had seen the ugly inner workings of the system, the ease with which prejudice could be weaponized and institutionalized. He wanted to change the machine itself. With the pro bono help of Robert Pinsky and a team of civil rights lawyers who had reached out after seeing the story, Julian and Annalise launched a landmark lawsuit against Ascend Air. It wasn't just for damages. The core of the suit was injunctive relief demanding court-ordered systemic changes to the airline's policies and training. The deposition of Claire Thornton was the linchpin of their case. Julian sat in the room, not as a plaintiff, but as an observer, watching as the airline's high-priced lawyers tried to salvage an unsalvageable situation. Claire looked like a ghost of her former self. The severe blonde bob had grown out into a listless, unkempt style. The cold confidence was gone, replaced by a haunted, defensive anxiety. She was unemployable. The viral video had made her infamous. Airplane Claire, they called her, in the dark corners of the internet. She had lost her job, her pension, her friends in the industry, and was drowning in legal fees. Under the sharp, methodical questioning of the Vance's lawyer, her story fell apart. "Miss Thornton," the lawyer began. "You testified that you believed the medical pouch was suspicious. Is that correct?" "Yes," Claire whispered. "It was unmarked." "They were being secretive." "Secretive? Or was my client's daughter, a minor, simply nervous about administering her own medication in public?" Claire didn't answer. "Let's talk about your search for precedent, Miss Thornton. In the 24 hours leading up to Flight 732. Can you tell me what you searched for on your personal tablet?" Claire's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him. The data had been subpoenaed. The lawyer produced a document. "Your search history shows multiple articles related to teenagers smuggling fentanyl. It also shows you spent nearly an hour on a forum for parents of drug addicts. Is that correct?" Claire sank in her chair. "My son," she started. "Your personal tragedy is noted, Miss Thornton." The lawyer said, not unkindly, but firmly, "But your job on that flight was not to project your personal trauma onto paying customers. Your job was to follow FAA and company protocols. Did you at any point ask to see the TSA notification card that Dr. Vance repeatedly told you he had?" Things were escalating. She mumbled. "He was getting loud." "So your response to a passenger you perceived as getting loud was to confiscate and destroy their property. An action guaranteed to escalate the situation further instead of, say, requesting a supervisor or the captain before taking action as is stipulated in your own employee handbook. Section 4, subsection B. A checkmate." Every answer she gave, every justification she offered only dug her hole deeper. She hadn't followed protocol. She had followed a gut feeling, a feeling poisoned by her own past and her own biases. She had seen a black family and assumed the worst. And the system from the captain down had initially backed her play. 2 months later, Attendant settled. It was one of the largest settlements in aviation history for an incident not involving a crash. The monetary sum was staggering, but it was the other terms that Julian cared about. The airline was forced to completely overhaul its training programs for all 20,000 of its public-facing employees. The new program, named the Maya Vance Protocol, was a mandatory multi-day course on disability awareness, handling of medical devices and medication, de-escalation techniques, and most importantly, implicit bias recognition. And the lead consultant hired by the airline to help design and implement this new curriculum was Dr. Julian Vance. The ultimate karma wasn't just punitive. It was restorative. Claire Thornton's life had been irrevocably altered, a direct consequence of the choice she made in that galley. She had become a cautionary tale, a symbol of prejudice's high cost. Her name was now synonymous with disgrace. She had lost everything she valued, a painful, unrelenting echo of the future she had tried to steal from Maya. But for the Vances, the outcome was transformative. They used a significant portion of the settlement to establish the Maya's Wings Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing financial and logistical support to families of children with rare autoimmune diseases, helping them with the staggering cost of medications and travel for treatment. The story, which had started with an act of baseless cruelty, had ended with a legacy of hope. The hard karma that had hit Claire Thornton wasn't just a personal downfall. It was the seismic shockwave that had cleared the way for systemic change, ensuring that countless other Mayas on countless other flights would never have to endure what she did. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been used as a foundation to build something better. That single terrifying moment on Flight 732, the clash of prejudice and principle at 35,000 feet, ended not just with one person's downfall, but with a ripple effect of change that no one could have predicted. It's a stark reminder that the actions of one person when backed by a silent system can cause untold damage. But it's also a powerful testament to the fact that one family armed with truth, intelligence, and an unbreakable will can bring that very system to its knees. The story of the Vances and Claire Thornton is more than just drama. It's a lesson in accountability. It shows that karma isn't always a mystical force. Sometimes it's a legal brief, a viral video, and a fundamental shift in policy that ensures such an injustice can never happen again. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Dark Stories for more real-life dramas that expose the truth. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. Thank you for watching.